Hi, my name is Caris Hughes. I'm the Communications Manager and Impact Researcher in Lurgus. This video is for anyone who's thinking about applying for an Erasmus Plus Strategic Partnership project, and it's to guide you through the impact and dissemination section of the application. I'll give you some ideas about how you can structure these sections and what kind of information you need to include in them. So the first thing to know is that this section is worth 30 out of 100 points in your application. The quality threshold is 15, meaning that if you score lower than 15 in impact and dissemination, you'll fail your whole application. And traditionally, impact and dissemination have been the lowest scoring area of applications, so it's important to really give this area a lot of attention. The problems, I think, come up from the fact that, for a start, it's the last section of the form. You can be exhausted by the time you get to it. Impact and dissemination can feel less tangible and more distant than the project activities that you do every day, which you may have a clearer idea of. Sometimes projects are unsure of how to articulate impact before it's actually happened. And also impact is out of your direct control. It happens at the end stage of the project. So there's less of a direct connection or direct engagement perhaps with it. And finally, there's the fact that people find impact difficult, and the most common adaptation to anything that we find difficult is to avoid it. However, as we said, it's worth 30 out of 100 points in your application, so avoiding it is not an option. Here's how you can engage with it. What you need to do is to start your project design with impact in mind. I'd actually recommend starting the whole application with the impact section first, because once you know what changes you want to create in a project, how your project activities are going to contribute to that change, how you're going to measure those changes, who will benefit from learning about your results, and how you'll reach those people. Once you have those things decided, the rest of the project really connects with that very strongly, because if you know what you want to change, you'll know that you can check if the activities that you're doing are going to lead to that change. So in this video, what I'm going to do is talk you through that process very simply, but I'd really recommend, if you have a strategic partnership project, to visit the impact tool on the website of the Dutch National Agency. There'll be a link in the information below this video, but this really takes you through the project design process and includes questions to ask yourself at each stage to check that your project is logical and that the activities that you've designed are going to produce the kind of impact you're after. So on the more simple basis, what you need to show in your application is that your project has a potential to have impact on participants, whether that's staff or learners, on the participating organisations, on external organisations, and on external individuals. So you're talking about having an impact both locally in your own community, your own organisation, your own country, and on a wider basis across Europe and through different countries. In any case, your results should be replicable and transferable. They should be shared with a relevant audience. Relevant is key there. They should be as accessible as possible and sustainable beyond the end of the funding. So Erasmus Plus projects are funded through public money. So the point of the project is to be able to share your results with as many relevant people as you possibly can. That's why accessibility is really important. So to take it to the application stage, what you need to show in your application is all of that information, but the person who's making the evaluation, making the judgment on their application, they can only judge depending on what's written in the application itself. They can't make assumptions about what you meant or about what you were intending to do. So you need to be really explicit about what you plan to do, and you need to give as much information as you possibly can while maintaining brief brevity. Very simple. So these are how your application is scored. With all of that said, it's really important to remember that your change is part of a bigger picture, that your Erasmus Plus project is a small part of the whole programme, and whatever change you're trying to achieve in your area, it should be proportionate. We're not expecting people to make massive systemic changes that change the world. We're expecting them to be really clear what part of their own world they need to change and have a clear plan on how they're going to do that. So impact is a process. It begins with inputs, resources that you put into your project. It moves on to activities, the kind of actions that you take to reach your goals. Those actions will create an output, which is something tangible. It may be an experience, it may be a website, it may be some training materials, but some tangible result of those activities that you took on. And those outputs will then ultimately have an impact. So you can see at the end here, we have both outcomes and impacts. You don't need to differentiate. You don't need to get too upset about the differences between outcomes and impacts. The key thing to remember is that outcomes tend to be short-term and immediate, and impacts tend to be over a longer term and perhaps more fundamental. So really what you need to be looking at is, have you put in place the conditions that can allow these outcomes and these impacts to happen? Have you put in place the conditions that will bring about the change you want to see? So in order to do that, you need to be really clear what those changes are. So think about what changes you want to create in your project. Is it for participants? Is it for organizations, for systems, for ways of thinking? You'll probably have more than one. You may have a couple of changes you want to create, but it's really important to be clear on those. You can literally pause this video right now, close your eyes and think, what specific events do you want to see happen because of your project? What would make you celebrate? If you have an answer for that, ask yourself, well, why do we want that? And then what would happen? And keep asking until you're satisfied with the answer. So if you say we want to produce a website, ask yourself, well, why do you want that? What would the purpose of that website be? What changes would it bring about by existing? What good would it do? So keep asking yourself why until you get a really good answer to that question. If you have any difficulty answering that question, or if you feel that you have one answer, but your project partners or other people in your organization have a different answer, I would really strongly suggest taking a few hours out of your day, literally 2 or 3 hours, to do this exercise called Impact Plus. Again, the link for this exercise is in the video below. But this is a guided exercise that you can do with partners where you sit down, you think about and discuss what your impact is. You discuss where you're going to see that impact, how that impact would be visible in your different target groups. And then you decide how you would collect evidence for that. There's a video on the website which will guide you through the process as well. I'd recommend you, if you're going to do this, that you choose somebody, a coordinator or someone to coordinate the process and give it the time. But really, if you could do nothing else to strengthen your project application, this would be the thing I would recommend that you do. So once you've decided what your changes are, you need to represent those changes throughout the application, because impact is what your project is leading to. So throughout the application, be sure that you're saying why you want to carry out the project, what its objectives are, what the issues and needs you're looking to address are, and how you know that those are issues or needs. Is it coming from your participants? Is it coming from your sector? Where did you get the idea that this is what you need? And then link it to the objectives of Erasmus Plus and Key Action 2. So literally have a look at the program guide, just at the objectives section, and see that Erasmus Plus is trying to improve education, training, youth work. Think about how your project does those things. Because it's all about how the activities of your project contribute to change. If you remember this part of the chain that we looked at earlier, you have an activity and that leads to an output, and then the output leads to an outcome. So you really need to make this process very clear in your application, how one leads to the other, leads to the other. How does your activity reach an outcome? And it's really crucial to remember that activities are what you do in order to create outputs. And outputs are tangible experiences, as we said. They could be a product, a website, a training manual, or something like that. But an output and an activity, they are not change in themselves. So what I mean by that is, if I say that I have signed up for a Spanish class, just signing up for that Spanish class, even going to that Spanish class, doesn't guarantee that I'll be able to speak Spanish fluently. It's an activity, it's an output, but it's not an impact. I could go to that class and become wonderful at Spanish if I have a great teacher and I apply myself, but literally being in the classroom does not guarantee that I'll be able to speak Spanish. And you'll often see this reflected in final reports for projects, where an organization might say that by producing a website, producing a resource, that in itself is going to produce impact. And you can't make that logical leap, because no matter how beautiful the resource is, no matter how well researched, unless it's widely used, unless it's widely needed, it's not going to bring about the change that you want to see. So What you need to do in your application is really make explicit those connections. So at the top here, you'll see, what would be the chain for me as someone trying to learn Spanish myself, that my activity is studying grammar, practicing speaking. My output is that I have 25 learning hours and I've completed all my workbooks. And the outcome of that, hopefully, is at the end, I have the skills to communicate in Spanish. For a project that's seeking to design an app, their activity is designing, testing, releasing their app. Their output is that the app is available to download for platforms. So it's widely available, as we said, accessible. And the outcome of that is that if enough people use the app, that many people will have the skill and confidence to engage Spanish people in conversation. So again, just producing the app is not the impact, it's the use of the app. It's people using it and having the skill that it was designed to create. So that begs the question of how do you show that those changes have happened? And to show sustainable impact beyond the lifetime of the project, your application needs to be clear on the progress you expect to make and how you'll measure it. So in other words, you need to have an expected impact, a change you want to see. You need to have an indicator, a way of knowing that it's happening, and you need to have a data source, a place that you'll get the evidence for this change. So again, here's an example based on the idea of producing an app. That the change you hope to see is that you want to prepare multiple individuals in multiple countries for mobility placements, we'll say, in rural Spain. And how you can tell that change is happening is that lots of organizations and learners are actively using the resource. And you'll see there's some figures in there, and that's because it's good to be as specific as you can about this. So if you say lots of organizations, does that mean 3 if you have a small project? Does it mean 1,000 if you have a big project? Give yourself some parameters there for what you're trying to achieve. Another indicator might be that the organizations who have downloaded this app, they spend fewer hours on preparation without losing quality of preparation. So in other words, the tool that you've developed is effective, that people are well prepared and they haven't sacrificed anything by they haven't sacrificed their time on something else. And another indicator might be that organizations outside Ireland want to use the resource that you've developed. So again, it's about this transnational element of Key Action 2 projects. It's partnership. So the results should be shareable between countries. They should be relevant to people in lots of different countries. So where would you get the evidence for these kind of changes? Well, I've put them some question marks here. Again, you could pause this video, have a think about it yourself. Where might you get this kind of information? And here's some ideas that we have. So if you want to know that organizations and learners are actively using the resource, you could look at the statistics on downloads. How many people have downloaded the app? How many organizations have registered to use it? Look at your website analytics. How many people are visiting your page? Things like that. If you want to see that organizations are spending fewer hours on preparation, but they're not losing the quality of their preparation, in other words, your app is effective, you could do interviews or focus groups with organizations. You could look at reports of participants, people who've taken part in the training and preparation, and see what they have to say about it. And if you want to check that organizations outside Ireland want to use the resource, you can have a look at literally who's contacted you from an outside organization. Or even something like social media followers outside Ireland might indicate that people in the wider area are looking to use your resource. So the places that you can get this kind of data are very varied, but as a general rule, you should look at the before and after stages, so before your project took place, after the activity took place. So you might get that information from things like interviews, surveys, reflective journals, peer observation, and so on. When you choose these data sources, it's really important to say in your application specifically who's going to gather the evidence that you have, when, what questions are you going to ask them. You need to be practical as well. So if you have a small project, then, or a small number of participants in your project, recording a discussion will be much more effective than emailing a huge survey. So really think about the scale of your project, what's possible for you to do. And it's really important, again, to balance stories and figures. Some people react very strongly to stories. Some people react very strongly to figures. Some people won't understand your project until they have both. So you need to look at representing not just the breadth of impact that you have, how many people you've reached and so on, but also what changes it's made. So personal stories, testimonies are a really good way to do that. So that brings us on to dissemination, because dissemination is literally about scattering seeds. It's about sowing those little seeds that will grow into something bigger and more impactful for a greater amount of people. Dissemination is really closely connected to impact, because by reaching more people, you can increase the potential impact of your project. So that's why it's really crucial to know, again, who can use the knowledge that your project is producing, who can take your information, put it into action, and how you're going to really connect with those people. So think beyond your immediate network. Sometimes, you know, we reach for the people that we already know, so that if you're active in homelessness services, for example, in Ireland, you can think of, well, the other homelessness services in Ireland are our target audience. But there may be different types of organizations who could also use the kind of project that you're developing. So really think about who could make use of what you've developed through your project. That's really your target audience for dissemination. Again, you could take a bit of time out to map that. You're probably familiar with stakeholder mapping, working out who's involved in your project. This is really audience mapping. Who wants to know about what you're doing, and who's influential is another big important question, because if you need certain people to be really involved in your project, if you need, for example, people at the higher levels of your organization to be advocates, or if you need local government to advocate for what you're doing, then you need to keep those people informed and engaged throughout in what you're doing. And the way to do that is dissemination. If you communicate with people regularly, if they hear from you a lot, they'll be much more likely to be engaged in your project, to be interested in what's happening, and to help you to reach other people with it. So as a broad guidelines about how to reach these people, one of the first things is to make sure that your medium fits your message. So in other words, think about what you're trying to convey, and then what's the best way of doing that, rather than thinking that, you know, we need to have a video to be attractive, or we need to be on the front page of the Irish Times to have an impact. Really think about, you know, what's the best way of communicating with your audience. So ask yourself, what methods do they use already? What are they likely to react to? And really concentrate on the needs of your audience, rather than what you think you can do, or what you think is, you know, more modern or more exciting. Really think about what's going to connect with the people that you need to get to. Remember that all the partners need to be involved, so the whole project is reflected. The projects have multiple partners, and everybody needs to be involved in this process. It can't be led by just one partner, because that means that just one country will really be targeted. So it needs to be across the whole partnership. Remember, as I said earlier, dissemination has to be a continuous process. It can't be a one-time effort when the project ends. You need to keep people involved throughout the project. You need to keep them informed, and then that will increase their engagement and your possibility for impact. And you need to allocate resources dissemination. You may need specific assistance with press releases, or maintaining a website, or designing graphics or something like that. There may be skills that you need that aren't in the project team. So think about that in the beginning. If you don't have those skills in your project team, where will you get them from? And all of that should feed into developing a dissemination plan. These really are the key points of a dissemination plan. You can represent them in whatever way is suitable for your own project design. But any dissemination plan should state who you want to reach, and it should be very specific about that, about who your audience is. It should state specifically what it is you want to share, what your ultimate message is going to be. And as I said, that's connected with what the change is that you want to see in your project. So knowing what you want to change will really help you to shape the messages that you need to share. If we go back to our example of the linguistic impact, for example, the linguistic app rather, knowing that what you want to do is improve language skills, you'll be able to share that message saying, you know, using this app has helped 100 participants to travel to Spain and improve their communication. You can use their personal stories to show the impact that you want and that's been achieved. So in your dissemination plan, you're stating that message. You're also stating how you're going to reach people, like what methods will you use to connect with them. You need to specify, I think, who will create your materials, because that really shows that you've thought this through. If you have a generic sentence like the website will be updated or a video will be created, it can kind of undermine the strength of your dissemination plan. A good rule of thumb is that if a sentence could apply to anybody's project, then it's probably not the best sentence you could use. So really get specific about who's going to create your materials and how you'll use them. Specify when and how often you'll communicate. State how you will monitor and evaluate your dissemination. So you need to have a process in place to see, well, is our dissemination working? Are we reaching the people that we need to reach? And if you aren't reaching those people, you need to be prepared to rethink. So nothing is set in stone. Your dissemination plan will be mutable, as so many of these things are. You need to do what you said that you would, but you need to be prepared to rethink the ways that you might be able to best reach people. So that's a very quick tour of how to create a dissemination plan and how to look at the impact section of your project. If you have any questions about this, you can get in touch with me. My email address again is in the video links below, and best of luck with your project application.